Live from the top of the beautiful towers at Merle Hay Mall, all 6 stories of it, it's Faith Works Live with host Michael Damastis.
Have you ever been so sick, you eat something and it just comes back up? And then it comes back up. You know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about puke, Dan. You eat something and you start vomiting and you start vomiting and you vomit so much that eventually you run out of stuff and you're puking stomach acid.
The dry heaves.
The dry heaves, and you go to the dry heaves, and it just wears you out to the point that you've got like the shakes.
Yeah.
And you're just laying in bed and you're exhausted. Well, that describes Mike Damastis, who's the regular host of the show today. He's actually that was what was going on with him over the weekend. He had a nasty stomach something.
We all have fun in different ways.
Yeah. Yes. I don't know that he was. Yes. I don't know if he would call it fun.
Oh.
But it was probably not fun to watch either. I hate puking. I'm a wuss. I'm a wimp. Can you say that on the radio? I'm a wimp when it comes to puking.
Yeah, I do it like once every 4 or 5 years. So I try to. I'll do anything I can to not have that happen.
My daughter is 8, and she is she's a pro puker.
Oh,
she knows what's coming. She's like, "Hey, I'll be right back." Goes to the bathroom, a little puke, and then she's done.
Wow.
She knows it makes her feel better. She's smart like that. She knows
she's got
it makes
something
her feel
going
better.
on, and she's like, if I get rid of this, it'll be better. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. So we're not talking about puke, but we are talking about suffering today. This is Faith Works Live. My name is Chris Roloff. I'm the director of 99.3 FM. We are a radio station dedicated to inspiring Iowans to experience truth, in which that means sometimes we just have to talk about where Mike Damastis is. He's home alone, curled up in a ball, wishing that he wasn't, because he really wants to be here.
I think he'd rather be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to go on record saying that I'd rather he be here right now.
Oh.
So, Dan.
That's a lot of pain in my life.
Can we just talk for a minute?
I think we should.
That hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
Dan Hudson, you're a pastor. You're a pastor of Pathway Church in Johnston. And how do I deal with Chris and how he hurt me just now?
So you have to understand sometimes that, sin has entered the world, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes people are just going to do things that are mean, and they're going to say things that are going to hurt your feelings.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just have to just understand that's the source. It's not you. It's not even necessarily them. It's just how it is. And the longer you wallow in the sorrow and the pain, the worse it's going to be. So
that's good advice.
Yeah.
That's good advice.
So we should have a show then.
You want to do a radio program?
I think I can get. I'm better already.
You feel better already. All right, let's do this radio program. Roll tape, Chris. Here we go. Live from atop the Merle. How does it go? Live atop the Merle Hay Studio Mall thingy dealy. Give us a call. All right. So we want to hear from you today. The question is, where is God in your suffering? Whether you're home alone, just from a bout of puking, or you've got some pretty massive suffering, long life of suffering, you've struggled with lots of things. Where is God in suffering? Where has God been in your suffering? I really want to hear your story, because I have to confess, I have not suffered much in my small little life. I've gotten sick, I've had colds and things like that, but I've not had substantial suffering. So I'm not equipped enough to really answer the questions of where is God in my suffering. But I'm sure that you have a story, so we'd love to hear from you. You can call us at 515-727-KTIA. That's 515-727-KTIA. KTIA, for those who don't want to look it up, it's 5842. So give us a call, 515-727-5842. Where is God been in your suffering? I wonder if Mike Damastis feels God with him in this suffering. Let me ask you a big theological question, Dan.
Right, yep.
Let's just be honest, just you and me.
Okay. No, yep.
Does God care that Michael Damastis was sick and puking over the weekend?
I'm going to say he cares. I'm going to say yes. But he also allows things to happen in our lives. Sicknesses. It goes back to the fallen world thing. It's part of this life. It's just part of life. Things happen, and sometimes sickness is one of them. Does he care? Sure. Could he make things magically not happen? I suppose. But yet that kind of goes against the nature of what is, right? I mean, that time will come later. At the end of time, but for now, we live in a fallen world. It's what it is. It's where we live. You got to put up with stuff.
So we can expect suffering.
Yeah.
We can expect suffering because we live in a fallen world.
You live a very unusual life to say you haven't suffered much.
Interesting.
Honestly, and you just need to know you will. So it's good to have the conversation.
Well,
knowing,
thanks for the encouragement.
I just want to say a big one's coming. That's just life. It's just.
That makes me scared.
I mean, I tell you what, I can remember sitting laying down next to my wife in bed, shell-shocked after our second miscarriage, wondering, after several months of infertility treatments, right? So a lot went into this moment of conception to a few months of development to the child dying, right? And the second time around. And just sitting there, just like the emptiest feeling, like, what? It's like you're numb. There is pain. Because of my faith and understanding, I was never mad at God. I was just like, man, this sometimes life sucks. Can I say that word? My wife would say no, but
it's like sometimes life is like a vacuum cleaner.
It is. I can also remember I was in a doctor's office, and we've had this conversation a few years ago, when the doctor looked at me and said, here's the deal, don't lift anything over 2 pounds the rest of your life. You're about to explode. You have ascending aortic aneurysm. I can't believe you haven't died yet. You'll be dead before you hit the floor, blah, blah, blah. We're going to surgeons and blah, all this stuff went on, and kind of leaving going, gosh, I came in for a cough.
Right, and
my life changed,
and you got a terminal sentence.
Yeah. Other side of that story is that didn't turn out, but we went through all the hoops, going to surgeons and everything. So I've gone through that. My wife sat there in a doctor's office. I sat next to her, and they said, you have an extremely rare form of cancer that 93% of people do not survive. I don't know how to treat this. We'll come up with something, but I can't tell you. I can't promise anything. And you kind of leave that, and hell, we'll see you next weekend. Or see you next week. This is So I've been through that situation, So yeah, pain. And you leave thinking, that's the world we live in.
See, and it's interesting. Dan Hudson is our guest, a regular guest on Mondays here at FaithWorks Live. This is on 99.3 FM. I'm Chris Roloff. Normally, Mike Damastis is sitting in the chair. I'm N, spending his time with you. Chris Brass is producing our show. Check us out on Facebook. Actually, we broadcast this on Facebook Live as well as on 99.3 FM. So if you haven't taken the time, go ahead and go to our Facebook page, like it, and you'll get notified when we go live on the web as well. And I'm sure there's a bit of a discussion going on there on Facebook also. So the question that we've got here before us is, where is God in your suffering? Where is God in suffering? Give us a call, 515-727-KTIA, 515-727-5842. You can text us as well at that number, or you can give us a voice call either way. You said something, Dan.
Right.
You said a lot of things, but one of the things that jumped out...
Only one real thing, though.
Only one thing that mattered to me.
To me. The rest was just...
I'm sure our listeners really enjoyed most of what you said. There's one thing. But you talked about faith in the midst of suffering, and let's get to the nuts and bolts of this thing here.
Right.
There's a portion of Christendom in the United States that would say, when you're sick, you should have faith and act as though you're not. You should claim that you are healthy. You should claim that you are well. You should claim that you don't have cancer. If you've been given a diagnosis of cancer, you claim, I'm healthy, I'm cancer-free, that you, in faith, confess positive things over and in and through your life. Maybe our listeners are like that. Maybe our listeners have been involved in that kind of church, or they are involved in that kind of church. And I want to hear your stories of that. Have you had an experience where you've been able to speak that way, speak faith over something, and things do go well? We'd love to hear from you that way. 515-727-KTIA is the phone number. You can call in on that. Chris, do we have a text on that as well?
We do. On Facebook, we have somebody that asked the question, is God able to stop suffering? If so, why hasn't he?
That's an interesting question. Is God able to stop suffering? This is Dan, this is similar to the often tricky question of God. Can God build a rock heavier than he can carry?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if God can stop suffering, why hasn't he? Do you have the nickel answer for that? That's not an easy question.
Right. I guess the nickel answer that I would say for that is, again, we're in the era of a fallen world of sin. He hasn't come back yet. He hasn't redeemed the planet. He hasn't redeemed, everything hasn't, the new heaven and earth hasn't been established, right? So we're in this time from the time of Adam and the fall of man to the time when Jesus comes back, when there's just going to be sin. Could he can do anything he wants. He's God, so he can change the rules. He can do what he wants. But just the way it's set up, we're in a fallen world where there's sin and there's pain. Some is natural pain, some is self-induced pain. My dad died of cancer after smoking 50 years. I don't think he wasn't even surprised, right? I mean, and we prayed, God, why did you make this happen? Well, because you smoked 50 years. Oh, that just happened. Here's the deal: we don't know the whole story, right? The end of the story hasn't happened. That'd be kind of like reading the Harry Potter series and stopping after book 1 and saying, "I don't get it. Why isn't everything resolved?" Well, I don't know how many books there were. I didn't read them, but the 29 books that came later, it was resolved at the end, but we're not at the end yet. All right.
Right.
Am I making that? I made it in a kind of a dime answer instead of a nickel answer because I kind of kept going. I'm a preacher.
I like it. It was worth all 10 cents. It was fantastic. That was at least a 10-cent answer. So
the end is coming, and it will be resolved then, and there will be no more pain and no more tears and no more anguish and so forth.
So is it a hopeless thing? Do we find ourselves just sort of hopelessly moving on, or do we have something else that we need to look at?
I wouldn't say it's hopeless. I mean, we understand because of our faith we're in this setting. Things are going to happen, and when I'm in the middle of that thing, God helps me. You mentioned faith and like claiming things. I like in my faith, we don't just claim. You don't pretend you don't have cancer.
Right.
That just kills you. I can say also, God supernaturally healed me, and I have MRIs to prove it. That's why today I don't have to worry about lifting things over 5 pounds. So God does intervene, and he does help sometimes. Sometimes he doesn't. We have to be okay either way.
So the question is, where is God in our suffering? How do we have faith in our suffering? We want to hear your story. Give us a call, 515-727-KTIA. It's 515-727-5842. This is Faith Works Live on 99.3 FM The Truth. How do we have faith in the middle of suffering? Let's talk about that. Will you join me?
You're listening to 99.3 FM The Truth, where we don't just rock the gospel, we talk the gospel. But don't just sit there listening. Come join us. Text or call 515-727-KTIA.
More rock, less talk. More rock, less talk. More rock, less talk.
I feel like I should jump in.
Okay, let's do it. More rock, less talk. More rock, less talk.
Oh, wait, I'm not that much of a follower.
Yeah, all right. Well, Welcome to Faith Works Live. This is Faith Works Live, normally hosted by Mike Damastis. I'm filling in. I'm Chris Roloff, the director of 99.3 FM. Mike is out sick, and so when we figured Mike was suffering, we thought that we would kind of bring this issue up. Now, Pastor Dan Hudson of Pathway Church in Johnston is here with us, as he is normally on Monday. And you guys have been doing, Dan, you and Mike have been kind of working your way through a series on doubt to a degree, right?
Right.
And this is an issue. Suffering is an issue that causes doubt for believers and confirms or comforts the doubtful in their doubting, if that makes sense, right? I mean, you've got someone who doesn't believe there's a God, and they say suffering, see, that's proof. That's proof that there is no God. But often for those of us who believe, we experience some extreme suffering, or suffering happens to someone in our lives, and we think, where is God? And in the midst of this, and we don't see God's answer. And if I could, Dan, let me take a few steps back a little bit to something that I brought up, and you have a different approach to this, and I think it's interesting, and that is faith in the midst of suffering.
Right.
There's a section, a swath, a group within evangelical Christendom that would advocate for a kind of faith in the midst of suffering that claims as though there is not. It is some call it the name it and claim it culture, where people say, I've never been so healthy in all my life before. I'm fit, I'm strong, I'm wealthy, I'm happy, I'm great, praise God. And they speak in a way to call things into being that are not. And I think they get this idea from being made in the image of God. God spoke the world into existence, so maybe I can speak my health into existence. Is that your? You smiled at that, Dan. Do you find that to be a scriptural principle?
I do not find that to be that probably sounds really good when you're in your 20s and 30s. It starts sounding a little less accurate when you get your 40s and 50s. And when you get to your 60s, I don't care what you speak. I suppose I haven't got that far yet. Things hurt anyway. We still live in this world, right? I mean, it's just what it is. Yeah, I would have a different approach as far as faith in the midst of suffering. My thought is God is sovereign. I am not. I'm going to pray, and I have 100% absolute total faith that God can do anything. I mean, I haven't limited God, and I have seen Him do amazing things, right, in people's lives. Who were suffering in different ways. And so I have no doubt that God can do anything, but just because I say so, I'm not the God He is. He's not my genie. He doesn't have to do anything I ask. So even when I was in my situation where I literally every night thought I was going to die, that was basically the last thing my doctors had told me, that at any minute you're just going to go. I went to bed every night thinking, well, Lord, I might see you tonight. It's your God. Whatever. I honestly don't care. I'm not that attached to this world that I'm going to try to cling. The kingdom is so much bigger. Heaven, eternity is so much longer, than however many decades I'm going to stand here. So what God you do, you're sovereign. You take me home. Awesome. See you soon. If you don't, to live as Christ, to die as gain. I'm going to live for Jesus. Tomorrow, give me a mission. Give me something to do, and I'll do it. And until that last day, whether it's 50 years from now or 5 hours, I think that's the faith part. That God's still God, no matter what, no matter how I feel, no matter what I'm going through, and my confidence is in Him. Maybe it's shifting our focus from this wild idea that God owes us comfort and health and peace and wonder and riches, and He doesn't say that anywhere. He owes us nothing. The cross wasn't enough? Are you serious? I mean, honestly, He owes me nothing. I owe Him everything. And so you flip that over, then, yeah, I'm His slave. He can do to me what He wants.
Dan Hudson is our guest. He is the pastor of Pathway Church in Johnston, right on Merle Hay Road, actually, just up north from our studios a piece. And what's your website, Dan?
thepathonline.org. Org, yeah. I tried to say org and org at once.
Thepathonline.org, and I imagine you guys worship on Sunday mornings.
We worship 24/7, but we do gather together on Sunday mornings at 9 and 10:30.
Very good. We're talking about suffering because Mike Damastis is suffering, but there's real suffering going on in the world, and for many of us, suffering is the thing that causes us to not believe in God, or can be the thing that hurts our faith in God. So where has God been in your suffering? Has He shown up in your suffering? Did you feel abandoned by God in the midst of your suffering? We'd love to hear from you. 515-727-KTIA. That's 515-727-5842. You can call in on that number, or you can send us a text as well. Chris Brass, do we have a text or a Facebook comment?
We do. We actually have both.
Okay. Pick one.
We got a message from Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
Facebook, who says, I know that God is with me because of His promises, that there is peace beyond all understanding, and as strange as that seems, I have felt that and have known the peace, that peace during difficulties and suffering. And that is actually what she posted, is something I can relate to. That's something I've also encountered.
And absolutely, that seems like Kathy's Facebook message, Dan, seems a little bit more akin to the kind of faith that you're talking about. A faith that says, during my suffering, I know that God is still there.
Right, right.
We're asking a rhetorical question, where is God in the midst of your suffering? And I joked before we went on the air, he's in the same place he's always been. God doesn't all of a sudden stop being because we're suffering. And that oftentimes is the hardest part of faith, is to believe that he is still being who he professes and claims to be in the midst of our suffering. Now, Chris Brass, the producer here at Faith Works Live on 99.3, you have another text?
Yes. Actually, two of them. Christ is touched by the feelings of our infirmities.
Say that again, Chris. Read that for me.
Christ is touched with the feelings of our infirmities.
Is that the soulness of the text?
That was the entire text.
That text came in at 515-727-KTIA. I'm not totally sure what that means, and I apologize, texter, because I feel like I'm dumb. Dan, do you know what that means?
They're basically saying that God cares. I mean, in a nutshell, that's what I got from it.
Oh, touched in that sense.
He's touched. He's moved. He wept at Lazarus' funeral. It wasn't the funeral, but at the grave. He cares. I think that's probably what they mean. Putting words in their mouth.
Well, that makes sense. I apologize. Yeah. Sometimes I overthink things, Dan. Well done.
I overshadow people. I understand. You're a little nervous. You've never done this radio thing.
I don't know what to do. I'm so scared. Somebody hold my hand. I'll grab my own. Oh. And we have another text that came in at 515-727-KTIA. What's that?
The Sadducees believe that God created man but left him to his own devices, that God had little or no interest in man personally. Thus they had little regard for one another, and denied the work of the Spirit through human efforts or natural means.
That text came to us at 515-727-KTIA. If you've got a question or a comment, you can text us at that same number, or you can call us at 515-727-KTIA. I think there was an interesting comment about Sadducees. I'd never heard that Sadducees believe that way. It kind of makes me think of a theological distinction that's called open theism. It's no secret that Chris Roloff is a Calvinist. I believe that God is sovereign, and I love him for his sovereignty and his involvement in every aspect of our lives and how he guides and directs so many things. But maybe a Sadducee or an open theist maybe doesn't think that way. Maybe they take that different approach.
From Sailorville Lake to Southeast Polk, you know where to find us, right here on 99.3 The Truth, KTIA. Join us now by calling 515-727-KTIA.
Hey, if you're like me, you're tired of the way people bicker and argue about politics. You know what's worse? You're discouraged by leaders who abandon their principles to play political games. Surely there has to be a better way to lead our country. Well, you know what? I think there is. And I want to tell you about an encouraging and an inspiring event that is challenging us to rethink what it means to stand for principle over politics. I'm talking about the Family Leadership Summit right here in Des Moines on July 15th. It is an annual get-together of thousands of Americans with a heart for family and a heart for America. It's all about putting away the labels, the insults, and the divisiveness, and putting principle over politics. This year, the summit speakers will speak on a wide variety of issues in government, entertainment, and the church, each of them discussing how to navigate leadership while staying true to their values. In fact, our values. Some of the speakers include George Barna, Pastor Jim Garlow, the Benham brothers, Counselor to the President Kellyanne Conway, U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley, and Joni Ernst. So if you think America deserves something better than talking heads on TV and those flame-up wars on Facebook, then join us, 99.3, at the Family Leadership Summit on July 15th. You can get your tickets right now online at thefamilyleadersummit.com. That's thefamilyleadersummit.com. And nothing makes me want to puke more than trying to read something for the first time live on the radio, but I tried.
Yes, you did great. You did great.
Did it go okay?
It's actually a great event. I've gone. This year I will be in Zimbabwe, so I cannot go. But
So Ron Carlson, production manager of 99.3, his favorite thing to shout is Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe.
And if he was still here, I would have him shout Zimbabwe for us to demonstrate how wonderful it is that he does it.
Maybe you should have him do that a few times so that when I am gone, I'll be gone a couple Mondays, that you can just use that as a...
Yeah, like as a Where's Dan, and then have...
Zimbabwe!
That's a great thing.
I think it's a winner.
We're talking about suffering. We're talking about finding God in the midst of our suffering. And we'd love to hear from you, 515-727-KTIA. By the way, my name is Chris Roloff. Dan Hudson is with us as well. He is the pastor of Pathway Church in Johnston, Iowa. Chris Brass is producing the show. And normally, usually, and almost always, Mike Damastis is the host of this show, Faith Works Live. You can check it out and watch it on Facebook Live. If you like the 99.3 FM Facebook page, you can see our beautiful mugs there. So, has God been with you in the midst of your suffering? Give us a call, 515-727-KTIA. We also get texts. What's a text you got, Chris?
A basic tenet of atheism would argue God to be immoral. In his foreknowledge doesn't stop suffering, much like you, Chris Roloff, knowing that your daughter is going to fall down on a certain day and get hurt, but you do nothing to stop it.
Read that again. So we got a text in from 515-727-KTIA that invokes my daughter and me by name. I love it already. This is just really uplifting stuff. Go ahead.
A basic tenet of atheism would argue God to be immoral. In his foreknowledge doesn't stop suffering, much like you, Chris Roloff, knowing that your daughter is going to fall down on a certain day and get hurt, but you do nothing to stop it.
Now, how can a loving God allow pain to happen?
I think so, but I think the claim, right? The claim of atheism is that God is immoral because suffering happens and he doesn't stop it, right? So the funny thing about that question, and if that is in fact an atheist who texted that, and I have a feeling that it is, but if it is, here's the funny thing. That argument is sad and pathetic and weak. And here's why it's sad and pathetic and weak, is because it's one of those, you can't reduce it all the way back down. If you just keep going back and back and back and back and say, where is suffering? When do we stop suffering? Then if we're going to, in fact, stop suffering, then we must end all human life. Because all human beings both cause and experience suffering. They cause and experience it. So life itself is the antithesis of life because life is where suffering exists. So what we have to do is we have to stop life from being if we're going to prevent suffering from happening. So the answer is, dear atheist, the reason why there's suffering in the world is because sin is in the world, and you contribute to that sin on a regular basis, and you're the reason that there's sin in the world. So stop sinning, and there won't be suffering. It's that simple. If you can do that, then suffering will end.
Yeah, true.
What do you think, Dan?
No, I totally agree with you. And that's the thing. We all contribute to it. I heard somebody say it this way once. I thought it was interesting. It's kind of stuck with me that it's like we're all drinking out of the same pond, right? And what happens is we have people all around the pond dumping their own stuff into the pond. It'd be our sin, but their own poison and crud and dumping it into the water, and they're thinking, man, this water is yucky. I'm not going to drink this water because I know what's in there. So then they move down 50 feet to a part that they didn't dump in, and they take a drink, but somebody else has already dumped there. So I mean, all the water has been poisoned. The whole world is full of pain and suffering, and the consequences of sin is everywhere. So no matter who you are, where you live, what you're doing, we live under the oppression of a sinful world.
I was talking with Dan Hudson, by the way, is our guest today. And Dan, I was talking with Ron Carlson, our production manager, earlier today about something somewhat similar. One of my favorite bands is U2. And Bono sings, U2 sings this song, I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For.
Right.
It's very popular. Off their Joshua Tree album, they're touring right now with the Joshua Tree album. I'd love to see them. If anybody has tickets and want to give me tickets to the Kansas City showing, I would happily go. This is a U2 live. Was that lame? That was a little lame. But that song, I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. Bono's a Christian, right? Bono believes that the Bible is God's word. He actually looks to the Psalms quite a bit and is encouraged and strengthened by the Psalms. And so you think of this song, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. How can a Christian say, I still haven't found what I'm looking for? Haven't you found all the stuff? I mean, you've got Jesus. I've got Jesus. I have salvation. I have eternal life. I have a relationship with my Creator. Haven't I found all that I'm looking for? So how can a Christian sing that? And here's how I think he can sing that. It's just like because of what Dan said. There's sin in the world. There's suffering in the world. The gospel promise of the kingdom is a place without suffering, without sin, without disease, where every tear will be wiped away. This hope that we have of the full establishment of the kingdom, I've seen it in Jesus. I've seen it. I've seen a glimpse of it. I've seen a touch of it. I've seen a taste of it. It's happened a little bit in my life. I've tasted it. But I still haven't found what I'm looking for because suffering is still all around me. Because every morning when I wake up and I look out, I don't see the fully realized kingdom of God. I see it advancing in places. I see the kingdom of God advancing in certain areas in my own life and in my community, in my neighborhood. I see it advancing, but I don't see all that I have. And so there is this real Christian longing for a future that is free from pain. But in this life, in today, and right now, we can sing like U2 does, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Where is God in the midst of your suffering? Where is he? Give us a call, 515-727-KTIA, or you can... or you can send us a text, or you can call us 515-727-5842. Chris Brass is our producer, and Dan Hudson's with us in the studio. I'm Chris Roloff, director of 99.3 FM. Chris, what's up?
Well, I just got a real quick question. Is it possible to have an absence of sin without having free will? I mean...
Ask that question one more. Go ahead and ask that question one more time. I think it's a good question.
Can you have... Can you have sin or can you live without sin where you do have free will? Is it
even possible?
Yeah, is it even possible?
Yeah. We've not seen it yet. Going back to Adam and Eve, who walked and talked with God on a daily basis, they couldn't do it. They had free will and said, yeah, I'll go ahead and take that one fruit God said not to eat. I mean...
Right, so... It's an interesting question. This is where all of our various theological bents kind of fall into play.
Yeah.
And this isn't necessarily a free will versus God's sovereignty kind of debate. I just mean the way that we sort of approach things. I don't know that I look at, personally, now I'm just kind of speaking here for me, I don't think that I look at my will, the choices that I make, the freedom of my will, to be something that I can control and move to a place of not sinning. I actually think that, like you talked about, Dan, that I live and move in a world that is broken, and I am tainted by that brokenness, that I have sin, sickness, and disease in me because of the fallen world. Mm-hmm. So my free will can be to obey God, and that's what's best for me, but it doesn't create sinlessness, or there's not a moment in which I'm not sinning right now. Like, I would argue that there's a place in which right now on the radio I am missing the mark, which is in fact sinning. I'm missing the mark in some way. As Bono would say, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a time when sin will be fully removed, but I don't think that I've had that. So even though I have free will, I don't know that I can get to a place where I won't be sinning. And likewise, maybe this is the other side of your question. Could there be sin if there was no free will? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Now, that question, our listeners have the answer to, and they're going to call in and tell us the answer to that one at 515-727-KTIA. That's 515-727-5842. Call or text 515-727-5842.
The traffic on your way home may be stop and go, but the conversation here never slows down. If you want to be a part of it, you can call or text 515-727-KTIA.
Woo! It was hot over the weekend. I tell you what, it was so hot. I felt bad. I have a cat, and we leave the house at 78 degrees, but in the middle of the day with all the windows, shades open, and all that sun beaten in, it easily gets above 78 inside the house if your air conditioner doesn't kick on until 78. So I was thankful that my air conditioner worked. I imagine if you had an air conditioning unit that was not working properly over this weekend, you felt it, you noticed it, you were suffering because of it. Well, if you found yourself in that position, or if you just know it's time for you to get that thing repaired, get that thing checked up, that AC unit, now is a really busy time for all heating and cooling companies. But we suggest here at FaithWorks Live that you call on Nathan Shanks, the owner behind the company Baldwin Heating and Cooling and Plumbing. They can also, which I thought about them by this sidetrack. I did think about them. I have little drip in a sink in like sort of the spare, like actually the laundry room sink If you have one of those, a little bit of a drip in there. And I was thinking about Nathan Shanks, and Chris is laughing. But anyway, if you need to get your air conditioning unit looked at, we suggest you call Baldwin Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing. Their phone number is 515-371-4036. That's 515-371-4036. And they keep this studio cool, which is hard when you've got a lot of hot air like I'm blowing out. My name's Chris Roloff. I'm the director of 99.3. Dan Hudson is our Monday guest as normal. This program is called Faith Works Live. Normally Mike Damastis hosts, but he's out with the pukes.
He is suffering.
He is suffering, and that is the topic for today's broadcast. Where is God in the midst of your suffering? And I've learned a lot, Dan. I've learned a lot. You know, this is the bummer about the folks that just get to tune in right now.
Right.
And they're driving home. They think they missed out on the really great stuff at the beginning. And so here's something that's a real big takeaway for me from this broadcast. And it's the contrast of your view versus a more common view within Christendom, not a common, another view within Christendom. And that is, when we're in suffering, that we speak faithfully, we speak over our suffering as though it is not. We say, if we find ourselves sick, we speak about how we're well. We speak about how we're healthy. We speak about how we're going to be, maybe. And that kind of faith, as they call it, helps us get well. It actually brings healing in our life. You talked about faith in the midst of suffering that is different than that. It's a faith in the midst of suffering that believes that God continues to be, that God has not abandoned us, that he has not left us, that he has not forsaken us, and that we believe that. And can you, Dan, can you say in the midst of suffering like that we are using our suffering to the glory of God in that way? Have you ever heard that? I've often asked the question, how do we use our suffering to glorify God, which seems like a weird thing, right? I mean, if you've got cancer or you've got something terrible going on in your life, how do you use that suffering to glorify God? And can we do that? What do you think, Dan?
Trying to get my voice.
I was trying to maintain. We're going to keep going. Yeah. Chris Brass, what do you think?
I've not seen it, but I've heard a lot of stories where people have used their suffering to bring glory to God. But if you study the martyrs from the very beginnings of Christianity, when they were persecuted so badly by the Romans, a lot of their actions, their willingness to go to death, because they would not renounce Jesus Christ, did actually convert people to Christianity.
Well, let me ask you this, though. Like, when we have, as an example, Chris, when someone finds themselves in a situation where they have cancer, or they're suffering in a major way, or maybe they've lost a loved one and they're grieving, or they've lost a child due to a miscarriage or something like that. Very difficult things, painful things. How can we use that suffering to glorify God? That's not really martyrdom, right? I'm not dying for the faith here. I'm not suffering for the faith. I'm not being persecuted here for the faith, but I'm simply in a state of suffering. How do I use that to glorify God? Dan, here was kind of what I was getting at. Chris brought up a great thing, and that is, martyrs died for the faith. They suffered.
Right.
I just recently watched Silence, the Martin Scorsese film. Yeah. Incredible film, by the way. But what about, most of us aren't being martyred for our faith in the United States here. Most of our listeners are not being martyred for their faith. Most of us, we're dealing with cancer. We're dealing with the loss of a loved one. We're dealing with a miscarriage. We're dealing with a diagnosis of maybe special needs that are just a new diagnosis, that our child has a special need diagnosis, something like that. Some incredible suffering like that. How do we use that suffering to glorify God?
Maybe, okay, here's my thought on that is, I don't think we try to use anything. We just keep being who we are.
Interesting.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
I'm a follower of Jesus no matter what. Good times, bad times, hard times, great times. When we lost our first baby, we almost lost my wife too. She almost bled to death. And we're in the hospital. And we didn't even know what was going on. We didn't even know she was pregnant yet, right? It was a tubal thing, and so we didn't even know. And we're having these conversations. Then we find out she's pregnant. And we're having a conversation, my wife and I, in the room, and the nurse is there. and basically came to the conclusion of God created life. We are so strongly, our faith tells us that there's a life there. And we basically came to the conclusion of, if it's between the baby and my wife, let's let the baby live. Okay, because that's just what our faith tells us. That Cheryl's had a good life. She was 28 years old, which is pretty still young. But it was like, if someone has to die, my wife said, I'll die. Let's let the baby live, and we were in agreement with that. Anyway, long story short, that nurse became a follower of Jesus. Going, you really believe this? And we weren't trying to use hey, let's just use this for God. We were just being people of faith. Taking a very bad situation. Now, she almost did die in the surgery that came, and the baby was already dead. It was a just a situation we didn't. So my wife did live. You just be who you are, and you face trials, you face pain and suffering as a person of God, living out your faith, realizing the faith isn't. This world isn't about me. Like I said earlier, it's not about my comfort, my peace, my happiness, my joy. God's not up there saying, what can I do to make Dan happy today? It's what can I do to serve my God? How can I live out the faith the best I know how? Well, I mess up, sure. I'm sinful. I'll do things, right? But I'm going to try to live out my faith. And in that, when people see you living out the Jesus life, they come to you. You don't have to wear a T-shirt that says, look what I did. It just happens,
That's fantastic. I'm sorry that you had to go through that. I'm sorry that you ever had to be in that kind of a challenge where you had to make a hard decision like that. Dan Hudson is our guest, and I asked Dan the question, how do we use our suffering to glorify God? And then you really flipped that question on me real good, and I like that. I think oftentimes we hear that question, use your suffering to the glory of God. And then we try to muster something up. And I think what you said is much more profound. And that requires that we actually be Christians right now. That actually requires that right now, if you're in a place where you're not suffering, that you shore up your faith. Right. That you get rooted and grounded in Jesus. And if you are in suffering, you are experiencing some great suffering, be rooted and grounded in Jesus. And if we look for ways to use this, to leverage it, to puff it up, to write a book, to wear a T-shirt, to wear a banner, to do those kinds of things, now we're using our suffering in a way that maybe just isn't very God honoring. Maybe we're trying to manufacture. Maybe it's very similar. What I'm thinking about now is maybe that's very similar to the folks on the name it and claim it side who would say, I'm going to just pretend as though I'm not sick, and I'm going to claim in faith that I'm going to be well. Maybe both of those extremes are a little bit diluted. Maybe both of those extremes are a bit outside of reality. Maybe instead, Dan, what I'm hearing you say is that suffering comes, but in the midst of suffering, we remain faithful.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's really what Jesus did, isn't it?
Exactly.
Jesus did that. We think of the wonderful moment of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he is there moments, days before the most incredible, unjust suffering that's ever been inflicted upon someone, the death of an innocent man, Jesus Christ dying, taking the full punishment and the weight of my sin and your sin, that he might become a sacrifice, the sin sacrifice for me, taking the full punishment of my sin. Before he did that, he looked and he said, you know what, God, that sounds terrible. If he would have said, I don't want to go through that suffering, if he would have said, I don't want to believe in that, I'm going to pretend like it's not going to happen. Can we just pretend that this isn't going to happen? Can we go a different way? Can we change this story? But he didn't do that. Instead, what he did in the Garden of Gethsemane, he knelt down and he prayed. The Bible tells us that he prayed so hard that he sweat drops of blood. I've never done that. Mm-hmm. But Jesus was there in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he said in that moment, not my will be done, Lord, but your will be done. The Lord Jesus Christ remained faithful in the midst of incredible suffering, and I encourage you, as Dan Hudson, our guest from Pathway Church in Johnston, I think would encourage you as well to remain faithful. Trust that God is who he says he's going to be, even in the midst of our suffering. This is FaithWorks Live on 99.3 FM, The Truth.